Thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me today, Maria. Please tell us your full name, where you were born and grew up, and a little bit about your family of origin.
Okay. My name is Maria P. Tafoya. I grew up in a rural part of Pennsylvania, in Pennsylvania Dutch country, actually. Very small town. It was so small that we had no stoplights or anything like that. We did have a basset hound that would lay across Main Street, and if there was, say, a fire or something, the volunteer fire department would have to move Mr. Livingston out of the street in order to move the fire truck. That's how small the town was. I attended one-room schoolhouses until I was in 5th grade when they built they called it a consolidated school. So there was one classroom for every grade. It was kind of interesting. And then moved to Yardley, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Philadelphia and was right directly across the river from Trenton. I was raised in a very, very strict Irish Catholic family. Went to church 3-4 times a week. At least my mother and the children did. My father, of course, did not, because that's sort of normal Irish Catholic behavior. Is the father goes Christmas and Easter, and everybody else goes all the rest of the time. We attended public school, mostly because my brother had attended Catholic school, and my father decided his daughters were not going to attend Catholic school because he felt the nuns were abusive. I was always wanting to ask questions and getting in trouble for that, because you're not supposed to ask questions. You're supposed to just accept what you're told by the priests and the nuns without question. You know, this is what you're supposed to believe, period. I asked questions, a lot of them, and got in trouble constantly. They would say, everybody who's not a good practicing Catholic is going to hell. And I, what about Moses? You know, what about, I don't know, Gandhi? What about
Jesus.
Yeah, but he was Jesus. You know, that's God. God's not going to hell. Never quite got that whole Trinity thing understood. I mean, if this judgmental God I was taught about hated me and Jesus loved me, and yet they were both God, you know? I mean, it just didn't make any sense. It was very, very confusing and very upsetting. I also grew up during the time right after Vatican II, or during Vatican II, as the church was changing. So from a Latin mass with, you know, English sermons and things, and no singing and none of that, a very, very rigid service and everything. Even in one of the churches we attended, there was no kneelers. So when you knelt, it was on the marble floor, which is the way they did it in medieval times. But generally in, you know, the 50s and 60s, they had kneelers, which don't hurt nearly as much as a marble floor when you're kneeling on them. And then suddenly, we're having Mass in English. And I couldn't understand it. I didn't know where we were. I kept getting lost because I knew the Mass in Latin, not in English.
Did you know what the Latin words meant?
Yes. Yeah. We understood. We were. I was in a family that believed in educating us. So we knew what the Latin meant. We knew that Agnus Dei meant Lamb of God. We understood the things that we said all the time, but knowing what it means and hearing it in a different language is not the same thing. So I would get very lost when the English Mass started. We started singing in church, which we never had before, at least not where I was. Maybe other churches had choirs and things, but we never did. And suddenly there's, you know, singing, which I loved because I like to sing, but it was confusing. There was suddenly guitars and the nuns wearing different clothes and looking like, you know, regular people, except they had really bad fashion sense. It was a very confusing and upsetting time.
Please tell us, do you have any post-secondary education? And if so, what did you study and where?
I have a Master of Divinity degree, which I got at the Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis.
Why do you think the Catholic religion as taught to you was so harsh?
In many ways, I believe it's because it was a very strict Irish Catholic, Philadelphia Irish Catholic outlook. When I have told decades later, when I've told priests and nuns that I meet that I was raised in a very strict Irish Catholic family from Philadelphia, they apologized to me. So I think it was sort of a function of when and where I was learning it, because other Catholics didn't learn the kind of repressive things that I did.
Well, you're only a few years older than I am, if that. But the Catholic Church, I went to a funeral there when I was like a freshman in high school, and they had the kneelers as you were talking about. It was
Kneelers is not the kind of repressive. I mean,
no, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It wasn't. You weren't kneeling on the marble floor,
right? Yeah. Oh well, this was only one particular place. It was not a regular church. It was a particular chapel that my mother liked to take us to.
What do you believe is the nature of the higher power?
It's love and forgiveness. God is love. God is everywhere. God is here. God loves and forgives.
Well, if God's everywhere,
Yeah.
not only is God in your heart, but God is in this notebook I'm holding.
God is.
In this plant on your desk.
Absolutely. God is.
When you were getting clean, and at one point in the paper you sent me, you said that you wanted a new community that was Christian. Why was it important to you that that community be Christian?
I had spent, during those years that I was not attending church, when I was so angry at what I perceived as the Christian religion, because I only knew my part of Christianity. I didn't know all the other facets and possibilities. But I experimented with Buddhism, with New Age stuff, with little paganism. I experimented and read about and studied all of these different traditions, and the one that I was really most comfortable with was naturally the one in which I was raised. Well, at least I think it was natural. I did not agree theologically with what I had been raised with, but I came to understand that not everybody was in that place. And I met, I was invited to a wedding from some friends who went to meetings with me, and I felt like I had to go. I had not set foot in a church in many, many years except for my father's funeral.
It was like you had to go because they're your buddies,
Right.
But you had a feeling of dread about going.
Exactly. So I went to this wedding, and it was in a black church, and the people there were so loving and caring and welcoming, and it wasn't anything like I was used to experiencing when I walked into a church. It was very, very different. They made sure that we were comfortable there, and that was a new and different thing. While preparing for the wedding, I had my dress that I was going to wear, but I couldn't even imagine going to any church without a hat on. I was raised like, 50s and 60s. You wore a hat. And I knew that most of the people in black church, most of the women wore hats. So I went into a hat store. And in that hat store, I discovered that the lady who made the hats was also making all the headpieces for the wedding I was going to.
Oh.
And I tried on hats, and I was talking to her, and she said, "Where do you go to church?" I said, "I don't. I worship God in nature. I'm spiritual, not religious." I really did use those words. And she said, "All church is a group of like-minded people worshiping God together." This was a new idea for me. I didn't know that. And there's the hat. That hat, after the wedding, because I had a church hat, I had to find a church. Or at least that was my excuse.
Okay.
But that's my hat. That's my...
And do you still use it, or you just keep it for
I keep
memento?
Yeah, it's a memento. I do not wear it because I don't wear hats now that I'm the pastor.
You get to pick. You're the pastor.
Yeah, I don't have to wear a hat.
Why is group worship important and distinct from individual worship?
And this is something that is an ongoing conversation in Christianity. Yes, you can read and study and worship God and pray, and do all of those things by yourself. You can. However, corporate worship, community worship, is the kind of family that we believe Christ was part of. And, you are all my brothers and sisters. We all have dinner together. We share these things together. If you're here and here and here and here, and you're just worried about your own personal relationship, you're not in community. And Jesus was, if nothing else, very involved in relationship with others. It was not just him telling everybody, it was him being with everybody. And the being with is really, really important to be able to teach each other and learn from each other and care for each other. I can't care for other people if
you're alone in your bedroom.
Yeah. And they can't care for me. It goes back and forth. It's mutual care and love and sharing.
Well, it's talked about in the New Testament
Yes,
community.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You described in the letter that you sent me that you received a calling to ministry. I'm very interested in calling, and so I have two questions. How were you called? So you should describe your thoughts and feelings about the call. And the other is, did you do anything to self-generate the call? And maybe even more specifically, is there something one of our viewers could do to self-generate a call?
I'll answer the second part first, maybe.
Okay.
I don't think that I did anything to self-generate it. And that was one of my concerns. Shortly after I started attending Treasure Coast Christian Church in Port St. Lucie, Florida, I was sitting in worship, and a voice in my head said, "You need to be doing this for me." And I don't recall if Pastor Betsy was doing communion or preaching at the moment, but she was doing something, priestly.
So you feel like God spoke directly to you,
God spoke
and you heard
directly
it.
to me.
You heard a
Clear
voice
clear.
like you're hearing my voice right now.
In my head. I knew it wasn't coming from outside. It was someone was speaking to me. And a few weeks later, when I was carrying a meeting into the county jail, I was sitting there with the women, and I heard the voice again, "You need to be doing this for me."
As opposed to a 12-step fellowship.
As opposed to a 12-step fellowship. And I mean, it was very clear to me. And quite frankly, that is the only one I remembered at first, because the day I heard the other one, I was later stung by something and went into anaphylactic shock and totally forgot about it, except that I'd already journaled it.
Wow.
I had journaled it happening,
read it.
and 5 years later, I read it and discovered it. For all that whole 5 years, I thought that my call happened in the jail cell, and that therefore I was supposed to be a prison chaplain. That was, what I believed. After getting the call and after, fussing for a month or two, I went to my pastor and I said, "I think I have to be a minister. I'm afraid that it's just, new Christian excitement."